Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Becoming a Professional. I'm your host, Rilley Ramos, and we are recording from Atlanta, Georgia. So we already recorded one episode here at the conference. We're actually at the mid-years. This is, I guess, part 2, episode number 2 of the Atlanta series, I guess. We'll have another one before we move on to the next mid-year meeting, but so you guys are able to follow along with the journey here. So before we introduce our special guest, let's go through our usual housekeeping. Now, this episode is brought to you by the National Chapter Beta Alpha Psi. Enormous appreciation for their support. Make sure to sign up for their alumni member network if you haven't already, so we can easily connect and have y'all experience all of the benefits that the network has to offer. Disclaimer, the opinions in this podcast are our own and may not reflect the position of Beta Alpha Psi or our respective employers as a whole. Now, I'm feeling a little bit of deja vu for today's guest, as he's a returning guest. Not necessarily the same hotel, but he was also here in Atlanta, so love to see that. And then regardless, we have a special place in our hearts for our returning guests. He is the Senior National Instructor at Becker Professional Education. Please welcome our special guest, Mike Brown.
Thank you. Great to be back in the same city, weirdly, but great to be back.
It's like we never left.
I know. Well, Atlanta's it's one of those cities that's easy to get to, so I guess here we are.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of people will say, like, I had a lot of connecting flights in Atlanta, but they've never actually come to the city.
Well, now we've given them a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this was, and honestly, I'm not going to lie, this is probably the only reason I've actually come out to the city was because for BAP.
Yeah.
So kudos to BAP for expanding my horizons.
There you go.
So returning guest, let's have just a recap of our last episode. And for those who haven't kept up or you're new to the podcast, Mike has been on a previous episode, and that was, what's that called? It's called That Educator Life with Mike Brown. So, no, it was a good time. It was definitely, wow. I'm like looking at the thumbnail for that video. I definitely had longer hair. I definitely needed a haircut back then, but
I don't have that problem so much anymore. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. I'm probably heading that direction too. So, and then for those, just to give like a recap of what that episode was like, we talked about the changes to the CPA exam. Mm-hmm. We talked about Mike's professional journey. So, and just to give like the formal official description for the episode. So here we have Becker's Senior National Instructor Mike Brown joins Rilley on this week's episode and shares his journey from serving as chapter president at his alma mater to paying it forward as an educator in the CPA review space. Find out what it takes for Mike and the amazing curriculum team at Becker to pivot with the recent exam changes. So that was a fun episode.
Oh yeah, and that was what it was all about for Becker when we recorded that was staring down the imminent changes to the exam. Now at least we breathe a little sigh of relief as we've come out the other side. So
yeah, and then so for what you're allowed to, I guess, put out that is public, sure. What is it like now that the changes to the exam have been kind of going through its rounds? Do we see any like noticeable or mention any noticeable differences with the scores or I guess any like public information that can be shared?
Sure. And if you're curious, I'll say that the AICPA does a good job of publishing a good bit of information. In fact, as of the time we're recording this, we're about a week away from the final set of scores from 2024 being released. So we're all eager to see. But they publish pass rates by quarter and by section, so you can always see historically and what's been happening. I think it's probably the most interesting facet of it right now are the discipline exams. So arguably the biggest change for 2024 and beyond is that now candidates have to choose. They will take the 3 core exams, but they have to choose one of the disciplines. And there's quite a disparity in pass rates among the 3 discipline exams right now. And we're starting to see that even steer student decision making to some extent. What they call the business analysis and reporting, some folks call it the advanced financial exam, has had one of the lowest pass rates, around 40%. And in fact, it's not been as popular as we've gone through the year. Meanwhile, it's the tax exam, it's the TCP, which is sort of the advanced tax, has had pass rates north of 70%. So
wow.
There is a significant disparity.
Okay.
And for me, part of that is to see okay, I mean, like everybody else, the examiners go in with a notion of, well, here's how we think, here's the difficulty, here's what we expect to happen. I would be curious if I could get them in a room, right, to say, well, how do you feel about it? And do you think is this what you wanted? Are you thinking about any changes? It's a process, right? So I think even they are just now, they've got, are about to have one full year's worth of data, which is really just enough to start to understand kind of the trends. But yeah, it's interesting. I will say probably something I may have said on our previous episode is that, when folks ask me, well, does Becker like the changes and I'm like, it doesn't matter if we like them or not. It's whatever the changes are, that's what we have to do. So if they add content, subtract content, move it around, whatever, we just have to adapt to that. And for us, as long as we keep hearing from the students saying, yeah, I felt pretty well prepared, or yes, I felt like the best thing I can hear from a student who takes the exam is, well, I wasn't surprised. I go, good. Well, then we're on point. So, yeah, that's for us the biggest thing is to say, all right, we were making what we hope was a reasonably educated guess where we think the exam will kind of settle out, and hopefully our course is mirroring that. But to the extent we may not hit the bullseye on every single point. That's what we try to learn to figure out. All right, what modifications can we make? That sort of thing.
Gotcha. And then are these changes being made like on an annual basis, or is it by quarter as the scores are being released? That okay, we need to, I guess, change certain areas, or how does that work?
So they can do it. Really, it's up to them. Generally, after a major exam change, it's sort of like dropping a really big boulder in a lake. You don't want trying to make changes. You're like, I don't even know where the waves are going to end up at this point.
Right.
So I think they're going to wait for it to settle out somewhat. They can make content changes, even as frequently as every couple of years if they want to.
Okay.
Usually they're more minor at that point, so they may, move content from one section to another. They may say, we're going to pull back on an area, we're going to add an area. So they may do some of those things. I don't foresee, again, I've said to folks, I'm like, I know people want us to look in our crystal ball. It's like my crystal ball is covered in smoke and dirt. I don't know either. We'll see. It's always an interesting time, and after the exam, any major exam change, right? For me, I have the peculiar perspective. This will be the third one of these I've gone through, so I know, at least past experience tells me it will settle out, it will stabilize. It's always a little bit chaotic in the first year afterwards, like anything brand new, right? Everyone is a little skittish about doing it and saying, I don't want to be the. I joke. I said people are happy to stand in line for the new iPhone. They do not want to be in line to be the first to take the new CPA exam. So, yeah, but that's evening out. That's evening out. But yeah, it's always interesting to watch and then see how the profession reacts. So,
gotcha. And then so as far as like being in front of the camera, I feel like very important skills that are needed are one, communication skills, and then also not necessarily. I mean, being in front of the camera, that's more of like a enclosed scene. But as far as like the communication skills, they transfer over to public speaking.
Absolutely,
you could be a great speaker in in the comfort of your own space, but when it comes to having an audience, whether it be virtual or in person, those public speaking skills definitely it shows.
It does, and it's an interesting point, Rilley, just because it works both ways, and a lot of folks might not think that, but we have instructors that are fantastic in front of a live audience, right? That's when they're at their best. They really feed off the room. They've tried to do camera work, and absent having those people and those faces and being able to kind of gauge, they don't do well. They're like or I even have one of our very best instructors. She said, I have no interest in doing things on camera, none. It's not where she is. And by contrast, we have had folks that are not great necessarily in a big room, but can somehow really translate that energy into a camera and can make that very approachable. So it is interesting that, yes, you might think, well, it's the same skill set. It's communication. Yes, you have to be able to articulate what you're trying to convey, sure, but there are differences. And so it's one of the interesting things about when folks they talk about public speaking. And they say, oh, okay, this is this big, right, that's talking to a room of 500 people. I said, well, it can be. I said, but if you're presenting to 2 executives at your company, that's the public. You're speaking to them. It's still the same basic skill set, but you do have to adapt it to a little different setting, and you have to understand your audience, because your audience is it's not going to be talking to a room where you're going to have a wide range of experience and what they're interested in hearing about. So you have to be willing to tailor to it. But yeah, it's unique, and it's worth noting that even a person who says, yeah, I'm just not comfortable in front of a big group, doesn't mean they don't have the potential to be a great public speaker. They just may be really, really good at speaking in a small room, or talking to a small group, or leading a kind of a group discussion, or whatever the case may be. Different people will find different niches that they excel at, even if there are other parts or other facets of public speaking or communication. They're like, yeah, it's nerve-wracking. It makes me nervous. And I think it's important. That's why, and you only can know that if you try. If you're willing to put yourself out there and say, well, let me see how this goes. And it's totally okay if you say no, this is not for me. I still vividly remember this. This was, probably 17 years ago. We had a prospective Becker instructor. This was back when we had a lot of live classes in Philadelphia. And so we had a kind of a robust process to evaluate instructors. And I always said it was a two-way interview. It's to say, does Becker think you have something to offer our students, and do you think you're going to enjoy doing this? Because if you're not going to enjoy it, we don't want you doing it. That's not good for you or the students. And the last step in that process, we called it a co-teach, because it was a little intimidating to say, all right, well, good luck. Here's your 4-hour class. Hope it goes well. So the first thing we would do is they would tag team a class. So they would teach typically the first half with an experienced instructor to provide feedback, and then they would flip roles, and they'd get to observe that instructor during the second half. Well, I was there, just happened to be there that evening. I watched this person. He did a fine job. The break came along, and he just walked past. He said, not for me, and walked right out the door. That was it. That was the last time we saw him. He's like, this is not for me. I'm like,
yeah.
So it is curious when folks who may excel at one kind of presenting find another, a somewhat different type, and they go, this is awkward and uncomfortable, and I don't want to do it.
Right. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the whole co-teaching thing, because, so I guess a little bit behind the scenes of like what's going on with the podcast is that we're working on almost like a transition plan. Because there come a time where I'm not going to be the guy in front of the camera. What's the plan?
Sure.
And so we're going to be reaching out to any potential alumni. They could be students right now, but for anyone who is interested in learning more about the podcast, learning how things run, like whether they're in front of the camera, like what we're doing, or if they're behind the camera, working the equipment, but just being like, okay, we're not going to throw you to the wolves. We're going to co-host an episode with the guest, so you'll probably see like a third person on camera.
That's great.
And so it'll be one of those things where like it'll come in like in stages where like there'll be both of us. I'll take the lead as the experienced host and have some participation from the new guy, new gal. And then we'll go 50-50, that we're vibing off each other. The energy is there. It's equal participation from the host, and then kind of the senior project, if you will be that new host will host their own episode. Like I'll probably be like the experienced person will be off camera with like their own mic if they need to step in, some off like to the side audio per se if there needs to be like a safety net. But it's one of those things where, hey, if you can lead this on your own or get to a point where you're comfortable leading this episode on your own, then we think that you'll be able to hold your own being like a solo host.
And I think that like so many things, it's not just communication. It's I'll tell you that in my personal life, when I started dating Tiffany is my wife, and when we started dating, I'm an only child, so I'm used to a very small household. Tiffany has triplet siblings. So
what?
So going for the first Thanksgiving at her house was a bit of a shell shock experience for me. But I find it unique that sometimes being dropped in the deep end like that can be jarring, and that's what as you say. But at the same time, if you can find a way to say, well, we're not going to throw every member of the family all at once at you, because then you probably would want to curl up somewhere and be the end of it. So you have to find a way to like, well, how do we get you kind of acclimated in steps, and whether it's teaching, whether it's a work project, whether it's getting an opportunity. And part of this is where when you hear so often that folks say you have to be willing to volunteer, you have to be willing to say yes when folks ask what would you be interested in, even if it's not something you feel like I've never done that before and that seems very uncomfortable, just demonstrating like I'm willing. Most people are like, yeah, I don't. The last thing I want to do is I don't want to throw you to the wolves here. I would like to cultivate my successor, right? I know for you, I'm sure you want to make sure this podcast is left in highly capable hands. And
Big time.
so you have a strong incentive to make sure the person gets there, right, and gets that level of comfort. And the same is true like with instructors, with teachers as well. That's something now we do a lot more virtual, but one of the things we typically do is a new instructor, they don't start by teaching. They usually start by answering questions through the chat while they watch an instructor. And then kind of as you're saying, it's sort of an acclimation process where all right, are you feeling comfortable enough now that you've kind of seen the flow, you've watched a couple different instructors do it, you think are you ready to try? But also we know some of them are like, no, I like doing this. And that's fine because Lord knows we get a lot of questions during class. So if they want to just answer questions and they're good at that, we're happy to let them do it.
Yeah, find your space.
Exactly. And that's it, is just to find what you enjoy and don't assume. Don't ever assume you're like, well, I wouldn't be any. The worst things you can ever tell yourself, I won't be any good at that. You don't know until you try. Mm-hmm. As awful as when people say that, you just roll your eyes. Oh yeah, sure. Uh-huh. If people, I think we said this on the last podcast. It was like, if you told my 19-year-old self, like, oh, Mike, you're going to love teaching, I'd be like, no, I'd be terrible at teaching. I'm a terrible public speaker. What are you, nuts? And yet, who knew? You're not supposed to necessarily be amazing at it day one. That's not realistic. But a lot of it starts with a willingness to learn and try and feeling that support. I had a boss that put it very succinctly to me. She said to me, Mike, you should always be training your replacement. If you want to advance, the company's not going to want you to do that if they don't trust that someone's coming behind you to succeed you. And I went, and it really struck at the heart of, this is about, making that next person comfortable, capable, doing the things that will help them along. And that's so important. And I've held that, kind of really close to my heart since then, to say that's part of the job. And that's how I see even Becker instructors now, and some of the ones that we have on our video, is that nothing makes me happier than to see a deeper bench of instructors that are now teaching for us and on the videos and doing different courses. That means the world to me, because I think that's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, is to, hopefully get more people who have this talent and may never have thought it was there and may not have thought that was something they were capable of, only to find out, if they are willing to at least start by putting their toe in, turns out they are pretty good at it. And that's kind of cool when that happens.
Yeah. And then, so you get to that point where, because the process starts, like you said, before you even have any sort of conversation, whether it be one-on-one, one-on-5, one on 500, that it starts with yourself. But I guess when you get to that point, some of the communication skills, and as far as ones that are notable, are like active listening, being clear and concise, having adaptive communication, and then also written communication. Like, you might not even be talking to the person, but I mean, if you're in the business world or almost any other job, you write emails. You have emails. So to be able to convey yourself and whatever the message that you're trying to put out there in an email, and sometimes things can get lost in translation, as far as like communication over email, that some people don't know how you're saying things. If you're throwing in too many exclamation marks, they might say that, what is that giving off? And so, because for me, I'm not going to lie, sometimes when I do my greeting, I'm like, hi, like, hey, Mike, exclamation mark. It's like, it might be a little too strong for some people, but let you know that, hey, I'm coming from a positive, like, hey, this is going to be a good email. Please don't dread this email.
Yeah.
Like, I hope this email finds you well, kind of thing. But something classic.
I would say that here's a goofy way that I kind of, the lens I use is, I go, if we wrote a CPE course about it, then it's clearly not as common a skill as it should be. We have a course in email communication because there are so many people that are bad at it. Yeah, it's and it's as you say, you hit upon probably the biggest thing, which is all you do is read any book about communication, is that we as humans, it's very, very little is what is said. It's how you say it, it's body language, it's tone, and all that's removed with email, right? All it is the message. And the other thing that the human mind is good at, and then sometimes it's not a good thing that it's good at it, is it tries to fill in the missing pieces.
Overthinking.
Yeah. So you say, oh, the 3 exclamation points means he's mad. And you're like, no, I was just really excited to email you. What do you mean mad? And that's where some of these kind of disconnects can happen. You mentioned adaptive. And as I say, I think even email, that is a form of communication. It is absolutely, and sometimes it is almost a form of public speaking in a weird way, because you're saying, well, I'm trying to convey a message to one or more people. I've still got to do that. And you have to realize what's going to set my audience off. Like, what is going to put them in a good frame of mind and a bad frame of mind. And it's never a bad idea to ask, right? You can do that. I did that starting out as an auditor. I would talk to my senior like, are you more of the anytime I have a question you want me to interrupt you? Or are you more of the keep your questions and then at the end of the day, let's set aside 30 minutes and talk through it, right? So some of that's the adaptive. Email is no different. I had a boss who he was very blunt. I appreciated that he was blunt, but he was very blunt. He said, Mike, if you send me an email, I have to scroll. I won't read it. I went, oh, okay.
Good to know.
Yeah, so I was like, I better be succinct or he will ignore it. And there's little things that I do, right? Sometimes in terms of tone, you hear a lot of these things like, if you're angry, it's okay to draft the email, because sometimes that can be kind of let that energy out, but then don't hit the send button. Like, walk away, come back 30 minutes later, reread it. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually say the email out loud, just because I want to hear how it sounds to me.
Yeah.
Because I figure, again, people are going to fill in the gaps. They're like, well, it's an email from Mike. They're probably their brains going to be like, well, I'm going to put Mike's voice in my head and kind of think what he might have said or why he might have said that. But to me, that way, if something isn't clear, or I'm like, it's funny that things you thought were, oh, it's really well written, and then you say it out loud and you realize, nope, that was really repetitious. I said the same thing 4 times. I don't know why I did that, but I can cut that down. I can make that a lot shorter. So, yeah, but it's funny how folks make plenty. I mean, how many stories do you hear in the news or just from friends about, you won't believe so and so sent this email and hit reply to all, and everybody. Yeah, there's from the technical to the communication tone to everything else. Yeah, it's hilarious. But we all, sometimes we're in a hurry. That's where things can go wrong. Is I got to get this email out, and you hit send, then you realize, wait, who did I address that to?
Oh no! Oh
yeah,
no!
Yeah. Well, and this is the hilarious part, is that there is another Michael Brown at my company.
Oh wow!
But he works in IT, so now I get all these IT outage messages, which I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do with this. Meanwhile, he's getting like Instructor messages. He's like, I think this is for you. I went, yeah. So
that is so funny.
Yeah, but at least I joked with him at one point. I said, our parents could have been a little more creative with our names. He's like, yeah, but that's what we got. So I went, yeah, fair enough.
Deal with the cards that you're dealt with.
That's the name of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then because you also touched on being like clear and concise. I feel like that's something that it's an art.
Oh yeah.
Like to say so many things, but in only 5 sentences, and to not get too too much fluff in your email. Because I'm not gonna lie, when I write my emails, I try to be proper. I try to have all the grammar, everything is in line. But then again, by the end of the email, you're scrolling. And it's one of those things.
We even get that, I think there's some difficulty in it, because how many times did you have assignments in high school and college where it had to be of a certain length?
Word count.
Yeah.
That word
and
count.
so we're always kind of saying, well, I have, and more often than not, you weren't going, well, I've written too much. You were like, oh gosh, this is only 3 pages and I could triple space it, but professor will catch on to that. Whereas, now you try to say, how do I say more in less? Or how do I, do I need to say everything in this email? Or, and you see versions of that appear in other ways you communicate, right? This is where I see folks who do PowerPoint, and sometimes I ask them, I said,
yes.
So is your intention that the PowerPoint is a reference document? In which case, if you want to load that sucker up with text and lots of details and charts, and absolutely. But then you shouldn't be presenting from that thing, because it's way too much information up there, and people are like, I don't even know if I'm listening to you or if I'm watching what's on the screen. What I found is a kind of a good middle ground, and a lot of folks I've seen over the years that adopt this, is they'll have kind of the main deck, which is meant to be their presentation, and then they'll have an appendix. They're like, yeah, I'll load all the high density data in the back. And I realize, especially when you're dealing with presenting to leaders, who don't have the time or the interest in a long-winded bit of that. They're like, no, give me the highlights, and then yes, if I'm curious and I want to dig into it, I trust you put those slides back there and I can look at them on my own. You always have to think about how to do it, as you say. It's about being succinct. Yes, I could add 9 slides to explain this, but are they going to care about all 9 slides? Probably not. Okay, well then which one's the really important one? That same boss who didn't like me, didn't want to scroll. You talk about adapting and preparing. You basically went in and said, I better put everything I really want to say on the first slide because he'll hijack the presentation after slide 1. And he almost always did. He would just take it. He would take the wheel. That was his personality. And he would start drilling down with questions. And they were great questions. And a lot of times they were hitting the very things I was going to present. But I said, I just have to make sure that different people communicate very differently and kind of gravitate toward different styles. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, again, sort of practical advice for folks: if you have never taken a DISC communication survey, and they're freely, you can do, there are free versions of that tool online. It is incredibly enlightening to understand, because it not only will give you insights into, oh, that's why I like to do it that way, versus, and that's why that person can't stand it when I do it, because there are people who, a lot of accountants were so process oriented. We like the take me on the journey, right? So when we write a PowerPoint, we're thinking, I want you to come with me where I started and what we did and all the steps, and logically build to the conclusion. And that for a lot of us is like, yeah, that's great. That's how I want to understand. That same boss is like, nope. He's like, give me, what are your 3 takeaways? What is your recommendation? I don't want to hear about the journey. I trust you went on it. I don't care what you did. I want to know what the bottom line is. And you're
relevant.
Like, oh, and it's about how do you adapt to the style of that person. When people joke about managing up, I'm like, that's part of it, is being able to flex. That's what you hear adapt, but the other word I really like is, can you flex your communication style? You may say, but I like to tell the story. Yeah, I know. That's maybe where you're at your very best. But you're going to have to be able to flex outside that and do something a little different, because you've got to know your audience and got to know what they're going to be, or what's going to upset them, or what's going to make them want to interrupt you and pull you off your game, and whatever the case may be. It's tricky, and it is. It's an art, as you say. There's an art to it, and like a lot of things in that field, a lot of things you can't learn unless you do them. Sometimes because you run into a wall and you realize, oh, now that was what, right? You can say, oh, I think that's what that means, until it actually happens. So you're like, oh, now I get it. Yeah, now I understand. I understand what Mike was talking about. I have one of those bosses, right? And that's what happens, and you figure out how to sink or swim at that point.
Yeah, no, 1,000%. I'm sure every listener has probably, or will for sure in their lifetime, experience that boss.
Oh yeah,
quote unquote that boss.
And and one thing I will say that, and again, there's a little bit of a challenge in it, because I know, right, I've learned enough about my style where I've realized what helps me isn't necessarily what's going to help someone else, and isn't always going to be as effective when talking to other people. But that same boss who taught me about you should be training your replacement, she was incredibly forthright, which I appreciated. And I don't know if she knew it about me, but the very first time we talked, when she was considering me moving on to her team, she said, Mike, I'm going to argue with you. That's how I wrestle issues. It's never going to be personal. Because she knew her personality was such that, and she explained a little bit more why. She said, my background is in the law. Like, she's an attorney.
Okay.
She said, so
you have to defend.
And you have to, and the idea of the argumentative debate is how she's wired. And so every time from that point on, when she would, I then understood. I said, you're not arguing to argue. You're arguing to test to see if I really believe what I'm telling you. But I always had in the back of my mind, but this is not personal. And I was able then to say where it might have otherwise bothered me. So I've taken that to heart, to say there is nothing wrong with asking another person, like, well, ask them what's their style, or try to, if it's talking to other folks, like, well, you've worked with so-and-so, what do they like? And what are their hot buttons, and that kind of thing. And also understanding kind of where your strengths lie, and how to figure out, all right, where's the best place to meet on that, right? How can I play to my strengths while adapting or flexing to what that other person is going to be looking for, what's going to make them happy or set them off, right? You don't want to hit one of their pet peeves in your presentation and turn them off to whatever you're trying to tell, or you're trying to communicate to them. So
for sure. Well, and then we touched a lot on the public speaking aspect of it, because for here, skills that go into public speaking are building confidence, having that presentation structure, engaging the audience, and then visual aids. So we touched on a lot of that. And I'm not going to lie, I'm already coming up with personal stories that tie to a lot of this. I mean, even so for our listeners, when it comes to like our quarterly like board meetings, I have to give an update on the podcast on how we're doing. And so I'm not gonna lie, my first take at presenting to the board was the story, the journey. This is where we started. This is everything that we've gone through. This is where we're at. Like, I'm taking you along as this is story time. The board, they don't want that. They want like the results. They want the what are the takeaways that we're getting from this, and like where do we see ourselves like projecting to, and kind of those like analytical piece, not necessarily the story aspect to it. Yeah. So I just had our recent board meeting in January. Now I'm no longer on the board, but I still had to present to the board on the podcast. And so like this is my second iteration on presenting to the board, and I essentially kind of had to flip my presentation style to instead of talking about how the thing is going, let's talk about the plan of like what I know a lot of our board members want to hear. So we'll put that up front, and then to at least cover all their questions or potential questions that were brought up in the past, that, it'll all be addressed in these first 6 to 8 slides. Hold your questions until the end. There is a time for questions, so kind of like managing expectations, because I know this is the crowd that wants to ask questions. Oh, yeah. So setting dedicated time for that and letting them know that there is time for that. And then let's go into like, the part that I enjoy, like, now I'm going to tell you like how the podcast is doing well and all the stats that are mind blowing. I mean, I believe from my presentation, we're in 19 countries. Wow. So 19 countries that's awesome. Are listening in, and it's cool to see. I'll have to do like a separate episode on like how like everything's going and stuff, but it's cool like for me to get into seeing the data and whatnot. But for sure. I mean, when it comes to building confidence, that's something that doesn't come to a lot of people instantaneously. I mean, you might be extroverted, that you already have a joyful personality, that you can be the light in the room. Yeah. But I'm not gonna lie, for me, I was that shy kid in the back row until the president at my alma mater pulled me aside and say, "Hey, do you want to be part of our best practices team?" I'm like, I was too scared to say no. Sure. So I was like, "Sure, okay, I'm okay. Like, I'll do it." And then that's what put me in front of a mock presentation, and that gave me the confidence to like, I got through this. Let's go in front of the actual judges. I'm like preparing myself up for that. It's funny because when we would practice, we would actually get into like what did we call it? We call it our flight attendant voice, where you're going through the motions. You say things that you emphasize certain things at certain times. You have your window in front of you, and for our listeners, I'm making a window motion in front of me. And this is where you keep your hands. Yeah. So as far as like any hand gestures, that don't keep them inside the box, kind of thing. And so it's stuff like that like I actually had to be taught that. Oh yeah. Like
it's an interesting thing, because I think, like a lot of, call them skills, I think there can be, and it's easy to say, well, I'm just, some people are built to do that well, and some folks aren't. I'm like, no, it's a skill you practice like any other. Yes, you can be better at it. Now, do I think, as you point out, someone who's a natural extrovert may find it's not as high a hill to climb to become an effective public speaker, but that doesn't mean that you're at an forever disadvantage at doing it. I'll tell you, from a confidence standpoint, probably of all the different tips and things that I've heard over the years, the one that has stuck with me is when you are up in front of the room, because by and large, people don't want to be up in front of the room. So their incentive, as they sit there in the audience, is they don't want you to fail, because if you fail, they might be next. So they're like, no. And so we always go in this notion of, oh, the audience is there to see me. They want nothing more like they're going to, what'd you go to the hockey game to see? A fight? What? No, you should go for the game. People do not go there to see you fall on your face. That is not the intent. And by and large, they're excited because they say, but if you succeed, you're going to keep doing these and I won't have to. And that can be anywhere from a big audience, but the same thing happens in the workplace, right? It's we're often working in a team of 4 or 5 and one of us has to kind of debrief our boss. And, well, if you're that one, the other ones on the team are pleased as punch because they're like, please succeed, please do well because I don't want to do this.
Right.
And so, yeah, if you're willing to take the chance, and yes, it is uncomfortable, certainly when you haven't done it regularly, it is a frightening thing. We even talk about that part of this is deep wired in our brains, right? It's not all that different than fight or flight, right? It's like you look at it, you're like, I'm surrounded by predators. Why would I want to be at the front of the room where I have nowhere to escape to? This is right. There is this feeling of like danger and threat, but you have to remember, no, that's the people in that room as a general bunch want you to succeed. And the other thing you can do is to say, and then hopefully you can find at least a few smiling faces in the audience that really you connect
that are
with.
Engaged.
And yeah, that's why when folks are like, well, how do you look? There's 500 people. I go, I don't look at 500 people. I look at 5. I try to find those. And I try to pick them in different parts of the room. So at least I can be moving around and looking around. But I'm kind of bouncing off those people where they're nodding and smiling and their eyes are open. And I can feed off that. Like, well, I may not connect with all 500, but I'm connecting with these folks. So that's good. And you try to go from there. But yeah, it's not as I only can say this because I was there, right? I was there I had terrible stage fright. I still, one of my favorite stories was my high school graduation. I delivered one of the speeches. I have no conscious memory of it.
Blacked out.
I do to this day. The memory goes as far as when we lined up outside and understand our graduation because our school was I think graduating class was 250 give or take, but they had it and I went to high school in Cincinnati, so we were at Cincinnati Music Hall. So understand when you spoke, you were surrounded on every side. So the students are sitting on risers behind me. There are parents and family and all that in front of me and in the balconies up on my left and up on my right. So literally in 360 degrees, you're surrounded by people.
Wow.
All I remember is lining up outside to go in the room, and the next conscious memory I have is walking away from the podium. Yeah. And people are like, well, you were so calm. I was like, yeah, well, or because I'd practiced it so much, it actually became almost muscle memory. Like my conscious brain went, I'm just going to take a little holiday here. You got this. Rest of whatever the part of the brain that does that. So I went from that kind of incredibly, but I think what did it for me was even in college, and I said, I'm tired of being afraid of doing this. I'm sick of it. And that's when I got into teaching, right? We talked about that in the previous episode. I said, then I took that opportunity. I said, well, I bet this will get me over my stage fright, is if I have to present twice a week without fail. Yeah. And I did. And then the funny side effect was like, wait a minute, I'm actually starting to enjoy this. That's weird. You never know. And that's why it's just, it's a very natural thing to be afraid of, and it's a very natural thing to say, I can't or won't, or who'd want to listen to me, and all. There's all kinds of things that will pop into your head. But you find something you enjoy talking about, and you understand, you can. And you just have to be willing to take that chance. And yeah, I know it's scary. I get that. But it's an easy way to get noticed too. If you want to, I find it fascinating. People are always like, well, how do I distinguish myself from my peers? I'm like, well, there's the first thing on that list. You want to distinguish yourself from everybody else? Get a reputation as being, oh, yeah, we need to get someone to deliver this presentation. Oh, you know who's great at that? Call them up. They'll do a great job. You get that reputation, you forever cemented your status above.
That's major.
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's like, I often joke, the other thing I tell folks from a confidence perspective, this is not just public speaking, it's life, right, is the classic, well, what's the worst that could happen? And ask people, well, what's the worst? And usually the answer, more often than not, is that, well, someone asked me a question I don't know the answer to, right? That's one of the people identify that often as one of their great fears of being up in front of an audience. Is like, but what if they ask me a question and I don't know the answer? Which I counter with, and then what? What do you do? And they're like, I don't know the answer. I said, okay, so what do you do? I tell them I don't know the answer. Yeah. And I said, then now what do you want to do about that? follow up with them after the presentation?
That's it.
That's a great question. I am really curious to find the answer, and I don't feel comfortable answering that right now. I do that. You talked about CPA, circling all the way back to CPA exam. There are 50 plus jurisdictions. Right? This is a state license. So there, if someone said, Mike, what are the rules in Idaho? I'm like, I don't know. I can find the answer. I know there's a Becker person I could call and say, you know Idaho, right? Okay, can you talk to this person? But I don't know it. But that doesn't bother me. I'm more than happy to be on a stage and say, I don't know the answer to that question. And that's okay. And it's sort of like this weird moment. I've seen it come over people's faces like, huh. I don't know what. So I said, if that's the worst thing that can happen, it's not that bad, then what are you worried about? And suddenly they kind of go, oh. Right.
But being honest with yourself and knowing that you don't know something, rather than fake it till you make it, per se, that has its moments, and yes,
it does.
It can be appropriate. But for times like this, where in a public speaking setting, it's like, okay, if you don't know, but you know who does know the answer, that's also a very appropriate response.
Or if you, I've done this. This sometimes happens when I'm doing like a technical accounting course or the like. I may think I believe I know what the answer is, but I'll couch it that way. I said, I'm not 100% certain, and I want to check. I believe this is what it would be. This is how it would be resolved. But that's when so many people use as a I don't know, I guess a responsive technique, as they say. That's a really great question. Like they tell everybody that. I once had a person who was a trainer in public speaking said, that's the worst thing you could say. I went, what He says, because all you're telling is everybody else who didn't ask a question apparently not as good.
Oh.
I went, yeah, I never thought of it that way. But
That's true.
So I try, and now it's like I'm weird. Now there's this part of my brain. It's like, don't say that. But I will say when someone asks me a question I don't know the answer to, or I said, thank you for asking that. Because sometimes I'll even say, you've actually raised my curiosity. I'm curious to know what the answer is. I hadn't thought of that. That's what I tend to applaud. Is like especially when I can do 15 years. I've never gotten that question.
Right.
Good on you. I think that's cool. It's like you surprised me, and I appreciate that. And because you also don't want your audience going, oh, I'm so sorry I asked that. I made them look, that I've flustered them and I've thrown them off their game and all of these things. And because again, they don't want to see you fail. So they're going to feel bad. But you're like, no, it's a really cool question. I don't know. I have a guess. I think it might be this. I think it might be that. I'm like, I would really be just throwing darts at a dartboard. I'm not going to do that. I'll even sometimes do that at the beginning of a technical presentation. I'll even say that preemptively. I'll say, if I know the answer, I will answer. You can ask me questions. If I know the answer, I will answer them. If I don't feel confident that I know the answer, I'll say so. And I promise them that up front. So there's no, to me, it takes the whole gotcha factor out of it, right? It's you may well ask a question I don't know the answer to. And if you do, that's okay. I understand, because I can't know every possible scenario, client, who knows? I mean, any accounting issue, right? You could dig it deep enough into it, and you're going to realize you're going to get to a level like, yeah, that is so niche. Like you're asking. I've even turned down engagements, personally, right? Someone said, yeah, well, they want you to do this class, and it was in Vancouver. I went, oh, I've never been to Vancouver. That'd be really cool. And they said, well, and they want someone who could use some examples from the oil and gas industry. I went, nope.
Oh, no.
Not me. I've never had a client, never worked for that is I would be faking it at best. I was like, I will still do it if you have no one else, but I think you should go find someone who has an expertise. And they did. They found somebody on our bench that did have more background in oil and gas. Fine. But that's for me is I don't take any. It doesn't hurt my pride to be able to say I don't know, or I'm not the right guy. Sometimes and it's the difference between saying, ooh, it's a little unnerving to make that presentation versus I am not the most technically capable. That's not my wheelhouse. I can, very much I can do it. I don't think I can do it well.
Right.
And I'm not, so meaning if you really need me and you have no one else, okay, but I don't think I think you could do better. And I don't mind saying that, because I was the same way we tell our instructors, like, we don't, sometimes folks are like, oh, you're going to make me teach the whole CPA exam. Like, no, any more than you're going to get me anywhere near tax, because I don't teach tax. I'm not wired for it. So, but that's why I say, I'm like, yeah, did you ever have anybody give a presentation and you could tell, how fast were you able to tell that they did not want to be presenting? I'm like, told them that because, again, instructors too, even experienced instructors would come and say, well, what if they ask a question like the CPA? I'm like, and then what, right? It's okay if they ask a question you don't know the answer to. You're the idea that you would know everything. I said, but what you can do is if you genuinely want to be there and you are genuinely interested in talking about the subject matter, that they'll forgive a lot. An audience will give you a lot of slack if they're like, well, you actually want to be here. You actually you gave your time up to talk to us. We saw that. I would argue we see that with keynote speakers at the mid-year meetings, right? The keynote yesterday was enjoyable. I could tell that maybe, and she even admitted as much. She said, I'm not super comfortable doing this. But we could tell she loved talking about it and she loved sharing her experience and conveying that to the audience. And so you could feel the audience going, even though maybe she clearly was a little uncomfortable and maybe a couple of times she was like shuffling her notes and you're like, oh, I get. Number one, there was empathy because you're like, oh yeah, I know that feeling of trying to keep myself on track. But at the same time, the audience, you could feel like this is coming from the heart and they'll forgive a lot versus someone who you're like, wow, who told you had to do this? Because clearly you don't want to be here and this is not a subject you enjoy talking about. I said, it works both ways. I was like, you get up there and do that, your audience will figure that out awfully quick and then they will tune you out because they're like, you don't want to be here. You don't want to be talking about this stuff. Why should I listen to you?
Right.
So it's why it's important to find things you have genuine interest in, a genuine passion for, whatever it may be. That makes it easier. I'm a big believer. People who talk to me a lot know I talk a lot, but they also know I love to say there's nothing wrong with stacking the deck. To me, that's stacking the deck in a presentation is to say, why wouldn't you want to do a topic you like talking about? Why wouldn't you want to give it to an audience? What's wrong with asking 3 of your closest colleagues to say, would you mind sitting on the presentation? I would just love to have a couple of extra friendly faces in the audience. That's stacking the deck in your favor. Why not? There's nothing wrong with that. So if you can do things, and for some, stacking the deck is practice. Sometimes it's, I want to go be in the room the day before. There's all kinds of things you can do, but all that falls under that header of why wouldn't you want to stack the odds in your favor? So go ahead. And that can help with that confidence too.
Right. And then as far as like when it comes to Beta Alpha Psi, we have a lot of opportunities for public speaking.
Sure.
So especially, I think one of the big ones is our competition groups for best practices.
Yes.
Now, you judge
I do.
The competitions.
I do.
So without like giving any like this is the secret sauce of winning or anything like that, what are some advice on how our students can improve their public speaking skills?
So number one is being willing to try. It may seem kind of cliche, but that's part of it, right? There was actually a team today that I was blown away by for the reason was, and I imagine you've certainly sat in on best practice presentations. By and large, they're given by the officers, generally.
Oftentimes,
This team were 3 pledges. So
really?
No members. I said that, I was like, good for you. I was like, at that point, I was like, even if their presentation skills may not have been as polished, because I'm like, well, you're probably juniors, maybe even
sophomores.
Right, maybe sophomore. I was like, man, willingness to do this, even though I can tell you're a little uncomfortable, and okay. But so that's number one. Number 2 is I love best practices because there is strength in numbers. And if there is a big difference between being up on stage by yourself and being up on stage in a group that are all there with you, right? And so I think that's one of the strengths of best practices. And I've seen, there have even been times where I have watched, this was, 3-4 years ago at a meeting, and I actually ran into this very same student later that day at the airport, and I pulled her aside because one of her teammates started to struggle, like really started to lose their place. And she not only knew her part of the script, she knew his. And so she's like, we could barely hear it, but she was whispering lines to him to help, not in a way that was meant to be, clearly she's like, I don't want to embarrass him. I just want to help him get his place back and get back in rhythm. And I was so impressed by that, right? And so it's those sorts of things, but I think there's an advantage to doing it in a group environment like that. And again, it's the, if you pick a topic that you enjoy talking about, and that's one of the coolest things about best practices in particular is you are talking about something you are proud of as a chapter. That's what this is something you're like, we did this thing. It's really cool. We're sometimes you can almost hear in their voice like, we thought this would be a good idea. we were blown away at how good, we did these metrics. Can you get over this? And we're all sitting there going, no, this is pretty impressive, right? There's one day it's like our membership went from 35 to 75. I'm like, how did you do that in 1 year? Oh yeah, 30% are not accounting majors. Well, how do we, where's that secret sauce, right? But it was because those, as I say, that's all part of that same notion of stacking the deck. But yeah, those are, to me, they can be a little bit pressure, but at the same time, it's like, it's 8 minutes. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? That's how long 8-minute presentation and 2 minutes of Q&A. It's kind of nice, right? It's not like I remember doing presentations in college. I'm like, yeah, it was 20-ish minutes, and then we could be up there getting questions for as long as there were questions, and you didn't know how long that was going to take, and you're like, is the professor going to stop this? Probably not. At least with these, you're like, no, it's pretty well structured.
Yeah, and you have
so
a person who's like
comfort.
in charge of the time too. You have a timekeeper.
Yeah.
And that timekeeper will cut off the judges from questions, and you definitely get a sigh of relief as far as from the presenter perspective that like, oh God, good. The 2 minutes is up.
Oh yeah. 100%. But as I say, seek out those, in the same way you talked about kind of how to cultivate your successor in running this podcast and making sure it's in good hands. This is no different, right? It's to say, yeah, I would not recommend someone is like, well, how many major speeches have you ever done? None. Oh, well, then here, you should speak at this national conference. That would be an insane thing to do because you're like, that's like, oh, I don't like hills, but I'm going to go climb Mount Everest. I don't think that's going to work out well. Find a way to find the intermediate steps. So best practices, project run with it, a lot of these things that give you a chance to collaborate, present, and work those skills. And honestly, the nice thing about some of that best practices, I feel like, is, and you won't know where you've placed if you don't place in the top 3. That's the way the structure is now. But we were I'll tell you this, as we were deliberating, which is the thing I did just before we met here, we actually stopped and said, even the team we probably would have in last did a good job, did a good presentation. It was still a very creative, interesting topic. I know plenty of competitions you go, wow, that team, I don't even know why they came, right? But this is like, no, they're all, and that's the thing, is that even the team that you can't say, well, they lost. I'm like, no, because they got to share an idea, they gained that experience, and a bunch of other chapters heard that idea too. I don't see the downside. So yeah, it is a unique opportunity, and yes, there's certainly a little bit of the bragging rights, but believe you me, I know how excited to see when they get announced. If they announce even third place, they are over the moon. If they get announced as a winner, it's woohoo. But I mean, it's a low stress because there's not really what's the worst that happens? We don't place. Okay. But did you learn? Yeah. Did you get new ideas? Yeah. Did you get some practice presenting on a little bit of a pressure cooker? Yeah. Okay. So what's the downside? It's a great way to get to find those ways to say, all right, well, now that I've done that, at least I've now climbed a little hill. Now I'll go find a bigger hill. And eventually maybe it's okay. You say, I don't think I'm ever going to get to Everest. That's okay. You may say, but at least I can, go hiking and I can go on some mountains. Okay, find what works for you and find the places you can be most comfortable in doing it. And yeah, you can get there. But don't set yourself up. I said don't stack the deck the other way, right? Don't set yourself up in a situation that is such a leap that you're going to be out of your depth. You got to work to get there, like any other skill. So,
no, I completely agree. And then before we move on, quick time check. What time do we have to be out? What time is your flight? Just want to make sure that
I'm good. Yeah, I probably need to leave 20, 25 minutes at the latest. I'm going to take the.
Okay.
We joke here in Atlanta that one of my favorite comedians says MARTA, which is the subway system here, is the subway to nowhere because it is rarely convenient, but it happened to be for this, so I can get there. The train station is literally a block from the hotel.
Okay.
And it goes right to the airport.
Right to the airport.
Which is a beautiful thing. So yeah, but I'm good.
Okay. And then so we can keep going then. As far as like common challenges though, because if there's anything that can go wrong, you might as well plan for it to go wrong.
Yeah. You have to. I mean, that helps disarm it, right? One of the things that will eat at you is what if this happens? Or what if that happens? And no, it's, what if that happens? What will I do? Right? Sometimes it's what if the technology breaks? What if the PowerPoint doesn't work? Okay, well then what will you do?
That's a good question.
Is it did you print a copy of your deck so that way you can still speak to it? And what will you tell the audience? I will email it to all of you, right? You have to there is not well, there's got to be one right answer. No, but the more of those things you can play out and say, well, if it were to happen, I don't think it's likely, but if it did, or take some of the variables out of it, right? Sometimes it's what kind of computer is it? I'm like, I'm bringing my own. Why would I want to risk using their tech? I'm going to use the tech I know works and that I have my own clicker and all those little things. I'm like, but that way I'm not worried about the setup.
Yeah.
It's fine if they have one, or at least ask those questions. Another part of that is ask, right? If you're not quite sure, the more information you have going into any presentation, the better. So if you're like, well, they want you to speak to this audience. Okay, how many people will be there? What's their experience level? Are these, there's a big difference between, I'm talking to a bunch of second-year auditors to a room full of partners, right? And that radically changes my tone, my delivery, what I'm going to put on the slides. Everything will be very different based on that audience. But unless I ask the question, I might go in with an assumption that's wrong. So that's part of it. And then the more you assume the worst and kind of say, well, okay, I can't imagine that's about as bad as I think it could get. Maybe something really off the wall, right? We've had instructors who didn't think about this, like, what do you do if you're at a hotel giving a presentation and the fire alarm goes off? We've had instructors, not in this weather, but we've had instructors, or the power went out. We've had instructors that, I took them across the street to the park. We had the rest of the class out there.
Oh, that's cool.
So the more you can do this, well, if that's something that off the wall happens, we'll figure it out, or we'll make do, or we'll whatever it is. The more of those things you kind of take off the table, you say, but I could deal with that. That's one less thing that will just kind of eat away at you, and be like, oh, but what if that were to happen? Gosh, that would be so bad. It's not likely, and so maybe say, well, if it did, okay, I think I have a plan, or I think I know what I would do about it. I remember one time traffic's always was a gamble, especially in Philly when I would teach there. So a lot of times I was teaching in what they call, like, many towns don't want to call their downtown. Philly calls it Center City. Never quite got that, but that's what they call it.
Okay.
And I could tell I was not going to make it. Like, the class started at 6, and I left my house at 4:30. And as soon as I got to the interstate, I said, "There's no way, I'm not going to make it." And so that was my nightmare, right? I'm not going to be there. So I said, "What do I need to do?" Well, I need to talk to our operations team and said, "We're going to have to reschedule the class. Let's get the word out as quickly as we can to the students. That way, when they get there, they know they don't need to stay. And I'm so sorry, but there's nothing. I mean, it was multiple accidents. It was just one of those things where, like, there's no other route. I knew I might be able to get there an hour late if things go right at this point. I'd always dreaded that, but at least I had a notion even then to say, no, I know what, when it was kind of that day will come at some point, right? That bad travel. It's the same way I deal with airline travel. Like, people get all bent out of shape. I always chuckle at that. Like, why was this flight delayed? I'm like, because it's air travel. It's, you just kind of go, you just expect it. I almost go with I'm going to expect it to go wrong, and then if it goes right, I'm pleasantly surprised. So yeah, I mean, the more you anticipate things going a little sideways, the less it's going to throw you off your game, right? And I that, weirdly enough, that advice translates to CPA exam as well. That's one of the things I teach students. I said, if you can think about, all right, so you work a question, you go, okay, the answer is C, whatever. I go, how else could they have asked it? How else could they throw that question? How could they make it more challenging? What could they do to? I said, the more of those kind of questions you can hypothetically kind of draw up in your head, every one of those you do is now one less way the examiners can surprise you.
Gotcha.
So the more of that you do, the better off you are. And that's, again, it's taking away, make the unknowns known. Say, no, but if that happened, if they asked it that way, no, I know what to do. I know how I deal with it. I know what to do in that scenario. You can't possibly anticipate every conceivable whatever could go off the rails, but you do as much as you can that's reasonable, and then you have the confidence to say, yeah, we'll deal with it. If it happens, I think I know what I basically would do.
Right. And I mean, some of the more common ones, like you mentioned, the technical difficulties, the engaging different audiences, and then also, I mean, just general nervousness and stage fright. But like you said, there are ways that you can make these things easier on yourself, where it's, I mean, having people in the crowd that you're familiar with, the technical difficulties, like having that plan B. And these are things that do come up more, that especially technical difficulties, that comes up more often than you think.
And can come up both in a live environment and certainly can come up in a virtual one if you're doing Zoom
Yeah.
or the like.
Yeah.
I always am impressed. Sometimes we ask for it. Sometimes firms that we work with do it, is they'll say, we want to go on 30 minutes ahead of the start of the presentation because we want to test everything. We want to make sure everything's working,
Yep.
that the quality is
Yep.
there. And I really appreciate that, right? And we do that. Even with our classes, we typically try to have everybody on 30 minutes before the class starts just to make sure everything, and they have us do like speed tests on our internet, make sure that just trying to anticipate anything go wrong. Yeah. And we even take it to an extreme of, and I applaud it. I mean, I think it's like, we could play a little more high risk, I guess. But we have 2 instructors. We always have a backup. So if the because we're like
understudy.
Well, in this case, it's what if the internet at my house goes out in the middle of my class and I can't get back on? I mean, I can't do a thing at this point. I might be able to call in on a phone, but what? But if we have an instructor who can step in an emergency, and they know, like 99 times out of 100. All they have to do is they follow along and they don't do anything. They don't have to do anything. They have to prepare. They have to be ready for that 1 out of 100 where something does go, like there's a thunderstorm moving in and that's it. And I'm off the air. And yeah, but those are the things, again, it's the plan in advance. It's asking questions. Like sometimes when beta events, they're like, well, we're going to be in this room, da-da-da-da-da. I said, well, what kind of mic will I have? Well, is it a podium? Is it a stage? Will I be able to walk around? You know what? Just all those sorts of things just to understand it. It's usually I'll go in the night before if I can and just to go get the lay of kind of get the sense of the room.
We do the same thing with the podcast.
Yeah, just to say, okay, what's the setup look like? And especially some of the rooms here in this session in Atlanta are peculiar. They're like ballrooms that were splits. They're like these really long, narrow kind of room setups. And you're like, okay, and you're starting to I'm trying to figure out, will I be loud enough that I don't really need a microphone? Or, those are the things that will just sort of, your brain will just keep chewing over and over and over again, like wondering. But if you are proactive and ask the questions, and even to the point of state your preference. I mean, like a lot of things in life, the worst thing they can say is no. So if they're like, well, all they have is a podium mic, I would like to get a wireless mic. Can they do that? No, I would even be like, I sometimes will push it as far as what's it cost if I want to run it for myself, because I know I will be more comfortable presenting if I'm not tethered to a podium. I want to be able to move around. So it's those sorts of things, or asking about the background, or asking about what the expectations are of that audience, or what are they looking to get out of it, or how much Q&A do they want, or how is Q&A being handled. There's all these kind of things, and part of this, to be fair, did I know all this when I started? No. I've learned this because I've had experiences. I'm like, wow, I wish it starts with I wish I would have asked that. Now I know better, right? Now the next time I will ask. And so those are the things that, sometimes those uncomfortable moments will happen. You're like, well, that was the hard way to learn it. Yeah, it'll happen. But then you will remember it, and you will ask the next time. And every time thereafter, you generally will ask too. So, and that all of that helps to, you're trying to remove those things that will eat away at your confidence, that will that will split your, it just adds worry at a time you don't want it. And then there are all kinds of things, like I say, like most things in life, pick people's brains for advice. If you saw someone give a presentation, don't worry about the whole thing. Say, well, what's one thing they did that you're like, that's good, I should do that, right? I had an instructor, one of my earliest kind of guy who mentored me, is he said, and this was at a time where we were using part of the lecture style. We used a tablet. So we had like a tablet and a stylus.
Yeah.
So he said, look, part of our class is you're there marking up the tablet. I said, yeah. He said, the problem is you may end up just being stuck here at the podium, and that's low energy. I said, yeah. He says, so here's all you have to do. Walk away. You'll have to come back. You got to go back to the style. But and he says, you walk around the front of the room, audience's feed on that is energy. You not pacing, just like you just naturally kind of highlight. Okay, now I'm going to explain my point, and you walk away from the podium, and you make your 2-3 bullet point type explanation, and you walk back, and you realize, well, that wasn't so bad, and actually that got some of that tension came out of my back just because I walked around a little bit, and the audience seemed a little less kind of like glazed eyes.
Yeah.
So it's those, but one by one you can pick up those little tips, or you can even ask, like, how did you seem so comfortable up there. How do you do that? Or what is it? And there's some things that I do now, like when I'm presenting, I don't even know if I doubt the audience notices it, but like I take my wallet and my phone out of my pockets and I stick them in my bag because I'm like, otherwise, at the very least, I might start fidgeting with them, which you don't really want to do. And I also don't want that to be like, anything that's a visual distraction for the audience or might make noise or,
Right.
certainly not if it's going to ring or vibrate or something. But there are little things like that, whether it's something you did, you're like, wow, I wish I hadn't done that. Or you see someone like, man, that guy was like fiddling with his keys in his pocket half the time he was up there. Like, I'm never going to present with my keys in my pocket. Okay, there you go. You just added another tip and the kind of thing you can adapt.
That mental checklist.
Yeah, and that you'll just say, well, at least I know I won't do that, right? And some things you mentioned, like where should your hand gestures be, and kind of should I put my hands in my pocket? Like, there's no one right answer. You have to strike a balance between. You want to do what's comfortable for you. I mean, some folks are very expressive, right? That's just their natural way of being is they're going to have bigger hand expressions, and trying to get them to say, well, keep it here. They're going to be like that. They're going to feel very uncomfortable because like, this is not natural. But you got to figure out, well, how do I, but at the same time, like, well, how do you think that comes across? If it's a motivational speech, big gestures are great, right? Because you're trying to go energy. Big gestures while you're showing a graph, probably less so. So
Right.
you got to figure out what's the right, kind of, again, it's the figuring out what's the right way to be comfortable and make it fit in a way that can work for you. And then there's other ways to, you can, if you're willing to be a little self-deprecating and willing to eat a little bit of humble pie every now and again, right? One of the most humbling experiences I did, it was Becker sent me and a bunch of other folks it was like a public speaking training class. And one of the things they do is you do mock deliveries, and
Yes.
they tape you, and you go in a little room with the instructor, and you get to watch yourself.
Yes.
Oh, what fun. But you suddenly are like, oh my God, I do that? And you were like, I can't believe I do that. And they're like, well, yeah, you do. Now, how can we make you so you don't do that? Well, now at least and a lot of times you're like, I had no idea. Totally unaware. It was totally an unconscious, subconscious kind of thing. So if you're willing to do that, sometimes it's again, having that trusted face in the audience helps, and telling them, now when I'm done, tell me 3 things I didn't do well. You can give me compliments. I know you want to make me feel good, but part of this is I want to get better. Tell me what I did badly. Tell me what I can't believe you did that. What'd I do? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, good. I didn't even realize, right? So have people that you trust have your best interest at heart, who are willing to share honest feedback and honest criticism to say, to get better. We do that with best practices, right? Part of what we do here is and I said this to our judging team. I said, when we talk about, we provide the teams that advance with opportunities for improvement. I said, part of the way I couch that is our job is to give them ideas to think about to make themselves better before the annual meeting. So it's not meant to be, well, that wasn't very good. Shame on you. No, it's meant to be, if you did, your presentation was already good.
Like you already placed.
But do you know how much we're sitting there going, do you know what the ceiling is on this thing? If you tighten this part up, if you were to clean this up, maybe put a couple more data points in here, oh my gosh. That's kind of where it comes from and that's what I would want out of anyone giving me feedback about a presentation, is say, what could I do to make it better?
Right.
Or what did I do that you're like, you never did that before, but that was awesome. You should do that every time. Okay, cool. All right, then I'll try to work that in. I'll try to, adapt that into my style. So.
Yeah, and then you mentioned mock presentations, recording, reviewing, role playing was another practical exercise. It's funny that you mentioned the mock presentation too, because I did this back when I was competing, and then I see other chapters do it still nowadays. But the night before the actual best practices competition, because usually the competitions are held in the morning, it's like Saturday morning. I kid you not, every mid-year meeting that I come to, Friday night, you will see students or chapters rehearsing and wherever the meeting space is, wherever they're going to be presenting, that the screen is already up there.
Yep.
And they won't necessarily, they might have a copy of their presentation with them to actually go through the presentation itself, but they will be running their lines. And it's funny because I think we actually got a picture of one of the chapters as they were practicing, and this was at like a past mid-year meeting, and I think we shared it on our Instagram story, but it's still like, it's still so funny to see other chapters go through the process, and like it's not like a secret that only the elite know, but it's something that like it works for every chapter. They do whatever they need to do, whether it's
to get them game ready, right?
Yeah, whether it's in the room that they're going to present, whether it's in their hotel room, whether it's outside where it's quiet, you do whatever works for you, but to still like go through the motions.
Oh yeah, but part of that is you also have to expect the unexpected. We had one presenter, and I chuckled at it at the time, because it was a chance to practically deliver the advice I just was talking about. Is that he came over as he was getting set up. He said, "I'm so nervous." He actually admitted that to the judges, like, "I'm really nervous." Like, when we give them the kind of you're going to you're going to do fine. And then as he's walking up, he darn near knocked the whole screen over.
Oh no!
And he had this look, and I looked at him, and I went, and it didn't go all the way over. Like it was touch and go for a second. We're like, yeah, it was like, but it stayed up. I'm like, and I looked at him and went, well, now the worst thing that was going to happen has happened, so you're good from here. And he just sort of, he kind of, there was this look of, yeah, I guess that okay. And he was smooth as silk after that. He wasn't nervous at all, which is funny. Yeah, it's the. As I say, it's the
just to get the nerves out.
You do,
yeah.
And sometimes, so maybe my advice now is to go kick a screen before you present to get those nerves out. But yeah, it's we can all. I think it's fair to say we're our own worst critics. If you ask 100 people in the room with you when you presented and yourself, do you know who's going to give yourself the worst review? You are. You're going to you're going to say, "Oh, it was terrible. Oh, gosh, I was so long-winded and I wasn't clear and my mouth was dry and and everyone else be like, "You did fine."
Right.
I thought it was great. Right? It's the same thing where people are after an event or a presentation, they come over and go like, "Oh, it was so bad. We missed our cue. We were going to do this and this." And I look at them, I go, "Well, if you hadn't told me that, I would never have known." Look fine for me, and they're like, "Oh, like I get it. You know what was supposed to happen. That's the rehearsal, right? We rehearsed this. After this, somebody was supposed to point and da-da." Like, unless you point that out to the audience, they're clueless. They don't know that,
right?
So you just move on. You just keep rolling, right? And you figure it out. But it's funny. I think rehearsal to an extreme can be a little. Because then I think you almost feel like it's got to be you get so tight in terms of your style, and it's not easy to find that balance between, well, you want to make sure we're rehearsed, we know what we want to say and how we want to say it without it becoming so stringent that you're like, the minute someone loses a line, panic sets in the whole group. You can see the look of like blood draining out of people's faces. I'm like, that's not good. That's not where you want to be at the end of this. You want to be able to just say, hey, I'm here to tell you a story, kind of a thing. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, all throughout the episode, we've been talking about different like best practices, advice, and whatnot. So, but to wrap things up, what's one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self when you started public speaking?
Well, I guess number one is I would have probably told myself, take the chance earlier, right? Because I didn't finally break out of that whole stage fright, introvert, don't want to do public speaking until grad school. So that perhaps would be one piece of advice. But I probably would tell myself some of the same, so particularly what's the worst thing you imagine happening here? And sort of that, and how bad is that really? And you go, okay, it's not really that bad. It's almost that begrudging, yeah. But that's what I would tell myself, is that this worst case, this fear is driven by a bunch of stuff that's highly unlikely to happen, and even if it does, you can handle it.
Right.
And I go, and that's where I am now. It's funny enough, when things do go awry, I think it's fun because I get to make a joke about it. I get to poke fun. It usually loosens the audience up because they're especially if they're kind of tense, they're like, oh, this is a very serious presentation. Something silly happens, you're like, well, and everyone kind of, it's this. So I don't mind when goofy stuff happens. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And that's the other thing is I tell all speakers if they can do it, as I said, and self-deprecation goes a long way. Is being willing to make a little fun of yourself up there can help, right? Don't take yourself too seriously is a good thing, and it tends to disarm and make and not only will help you feel more at ease because you're kind of poking a little fun at yourself, but it tends to make the audience more at ease as well. So I would probably tell myself that too, to say, hey,
it's
poke a little fun.
Yeah, it's always a learning opportunity. It's something that it's another thing for you to move or take away, and like, okay, for the next one, I know that this could happen. Yeah, and we'll go from there.
And you move on, and you learn, and you keep refining your craft. Part of me says it's a performing art like any other, right? I'm sure if you Lord knows I have 2 left feet, but I'm sure if you talk to a dancer, a singer, an actor, whatever, they would say something similar like, yeah, things go wrong, you learn, you move on, and next time you try to be a little bit better. And I think this is no different. It's just a different type of performance, but it is a performance. But you're not supposed, but no one, I mean, we all recognize a bad actor, right? We can say, wow, this is your first TV show, I'm guessing, based on how you're doing this. We can tell. I'm like, so, but do people probably start there and then, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they're winning awards? Sure. So why not you? It's the same thing, is that no, you're not supposed to be great, amazing. If you're lucky, you're pretty great at it out of the gate. But yeah, like any other thing, you're going to kind of practice and hone your craft. But you can get better at it. I've seen a lot of people believe they weren't built for it, only to find out not only were they built for it, but they actually are built to be pretty darn good at it too.
1,000% agree. I mean, unfortunately, that's all. I think that's all the time that we have. But I'm sure we can keep going at this for hours. But for our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow us from whatever platform you're tuning in from. Also, check out the show notes for the various social media pages and official BAP swag. Mike, thank you again for,
of course,
being a returning guest on the podcast. We have a special place for you in our spot. So
I feel the same way. So I really appreciated the opportunity. Thank you.
Of course. And so it was a pleasure having you. And we'll definitely have to have you on as yet a returning guest. So you already have that status. We can always bank on that.
Works for me.
And so with that, we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional. Hey everyone, Riley here with the credits. This episode, titled Clear and Concise, How to Say More with Less, was hosted by myself, Riley Ramos, and accompanied by our special guest, returning guest, that is, Mike Brown. Music was sourced from Resolute Audio and Fine-Tune Music on Adobe Stock. Huge shout out to Beta Alpha Psi National Chapter for their financial support in keeping the podcast going strong. Now, if you haven't already, please join the alumni and member network. Details can be found in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of Becoming a Professional.